great pleasure today to host this GCC. I've been really looking forward to it, David. The subject matter is amazing. I've known David for quite some time. He has a storied background as an entrepreneur. He started out of Wharton Business School with an executive search business. He then ended up at a Gartner company, the executive board, the corporate executive board. But his passion is really identifying characteristics, traits, and opportunities for individuals to really realize their full potential. And he's done that from a data and research foundation perspective. And today, David is going to share with us his experience, those of his companies. I'd like to remind everybody that in YPO spirit, we'll use some forum protocols, which means David is going to share some really live examples from companies that he's worked with over the years. We're a user, both at the board level and within YPO, of David's data, his research, his profiling and assessment tools. And we've used them to great benefit, particularly in several transformative areas that are really critically important for the success and the future of YPO. Just some housekeeping things, and I'll go through these quickly. If you have any questions for David, please submit them via the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen, and then we'll get to those in the Q&A session. We'll keep a track of those. We will be doing some polling, and we'll start with a poll in a second. Please note that the call is also being recorded. It will come up in the exchange on the source, and it'll be there for you to access at your leisure and to come back and look at various things. And I'll also be able to share with you individually the presentation on a PDF if you email me, and we'll talk about that later. So I'm going to throw it over to David, particularly in light of the subject and the hero's journey, and really just put a poll up. And the poll is, how familiar are each of you with Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces? So Nicole, if you could put that poll up for everybody, and we'll get cracking with some live activity. So how familiar are you with Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces?
We've got some questions still, the answers still coming in. Okay, and there we go. We're going to end the poll. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all. Great, so not at all 81%, a little bit 13%, and quite familiar 6%. So David, yeah, you know, take us through, and what is it all about?
Yeah. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and great to be here with you all. The hero's journey concept came out of Joseph Campbell's book in the 1940s, and if you take a look at the standard format in Hollywood for so many movies, it follows the same format. And what was interesting is over the years in our business, working with game-changing leaders out there driving transformations, the great ones all had a terrific story, and the story kept repeating itself over and over again. Similar challenges, similar excitement, heroes emerging, villains along the way, etc. So it came up in multiple conversations, and people said, you know, this is almost like a Hollywood movie. So we studied this book, which ultimately George Lucas and so many other directors used as a format in developing a movie, and we thought it'd be very applicable as an owner of a company, as a CEO, as an executive sponsor. When you're trying to go out and really make something happen with a sense of urgency and all, there seem to be some formats that were in parallel. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about taking that model that's frankly goes back thousands of years, the whole format of stories over the years, and see how this can be applied to your highest priority endeavors.
And David, you know, And thank you. And we'll get into now, hopefully, looking at the elements of the hero's journey, what's specifically important to business success. But could you perhaps frame why it's critical to really leverage this this really systems operationalization approach that you've built? You've really built a sustained methodology to be able to identify the characteristics needed for an individual to really drive success, by pulling the right people together. So that's going to be part, I'm sure, of what you'll be discussing with us.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, again, in terms of the audience, and as we were preparing for today, thinking about CEOs, owners, executive sponsors, we're going to use the word producer to characterize the audience. And the reason we're going to use the word producer, or what we call the hyper producer, is some of you may have attended our session in Singapore at Edge. And there we talk specifically about the type of leader you would want for transformation. Today we're going to take it to the next level, which is choosing the right leader and then what you do following that. Now, if we can scroll forward, Nicole, a couple slides, what we're going to see in terms of the kickoff, one more please, is this format of the hero's journey, which again, as we go through this, you're gonna be able to think back to different movies that sort of followed this format: The Terminator, Alien, Star Wars, so many others, that they all start with the business as usual. And if you think about right now your business, your organization, the economy's pretty good. Most organizations are doing well. Iterative growth. 5-10% growth year over year. We're doing well. Things are going along. We have organizational charts which were designed really to maintain consistency and reliability. And that's essentially the storyline for how so many businesses are doing today. Now, when we sit down with a client, what they will oftentimes say is, we're trying to all of a sudden prepare for being disrupted. Digital transformation affecting 80% of companies right now in some way, shape, or form. But the problem is, and even Sean and I were talking about this morning over breakfast, is in a business as usual world where things are going pretty well, how do you actually create the sense of urgency? How do you create a storyline as the owner of the organization or executive sponsor to actually have this breakthrough success? That's the basis of this model. And again, what we're going to talk about today does not have to do with business as usual. This has to do, and the reason this is the first step in the process is in order for you to evaluate whether or not a quest is worthy, whether a story is worthy of doing transformation, compare it to the business as usual. Is it significant enough? Because as the owner of the organization, if you keep bringing in new initiatives and you try to make it seem like it's a big deal, but it's not a big deal, this model won't work. So it's very important you use the business as usual as the benchmark to warrant whether or not it's worth going down the storyline.
Great.
Excellent. Sean, should we just kind of continue through the phases?
Yes, let's continue through the phases.
Great. Okay, so the first step in this process is take a look at the current state of affairs and think very carefully, as you go to the next slide, Nicole, very carefully about a call to action. This essentially becomes your role as the producer in identifying a quest that is really worthy. Now, this is going to take some courage. This is going to take some courage to be able to say, whether or not it's a digital transformation, whether or not you're really going to go forth with that acquisition, of another company, what you're going to pursue, but really figuring that out. Using a football analogy, you think about the owner of a team. Are you committed to a Super Bowl? Are you committed to a dynasty? How serious are you about that pursuit? And ultimately defining what victory is. We have found with our clients, some of whom are here, that the reality is 50% of all of these transformations, all of these storylines fail because it's not defined up front.
Yes.
What is that objective? What is that win? How will we know if we win or lose? Metrics, putting the metrics to it. So at a high level as the owner, being able to define what that is and make it exciting. Is this going to be fun? One of the other reasons, Sean, we went back to the hero's journey is we all watch these movies. We all watch, other forms of entertainment. Why not be part of it? And so what our focus is figuring out what role we fit into in a storyline and helping to orchestrate that. So that's the call to action phase.
Yeah, and David, what really came up for us in the context of the call to action was really identifying something that was out of the norm, that was immediate, and that really required a unique skill set, or the ability to find somebody within the organization or a group of individuals that had both the competence, the unique capability, and the leadership characteristics that you could rely on. Mm-hmm. So, I just wanted to add that to this.
Yeah, it was, and there was a lot. I remember we were talking about different priorities YPO had, and really thinking about something that was worthy enough for the board to be fully behind, for you and Scott to be behind, and really to put out there. This is not an initiative of a week, and this is very important. Yes. Using this formula, using this approach, it is key that you pressure check it and again compare it to the baseline, which is business as usual, to really warrant that. Okay, so if we go to the next phase, after the call to action, here's where things start to get interesting. So you're the owner of the company, you're the executive sponsor, you're the CEO, what we're calling the producer. You're the producer. Okay. The next most important decision you make, and arguably really the only decision you have to be able to make, is choosing the director of the production. This is what we call the hyper director. This is the tap on the shoulder. This is saying, hey, who is the right person to actually recruit the team, take the outcome that was defined and really delineate the metrics and the accompanying goals, and ultimately lead things forward. Now, we were very struck by this in our experience in assessing thousands of executives. We have been able to track those who have succeeded and many who have failed. Far more who have failed than succeeded in this. And our data and our benchmarks have really surfaced a few things that are critical when you choose that director, and they're a little counterintuitive. Surprisingly consistent, though, with the hero's journey model. The first thing has to do with the concept that the person that you want to recruit likely does not want the role. Okay, they're probably already overloaded with other work. They recognize that what they're about to do could be really destructive to them personally, their career, even their family. Again, if this quest is worthwhile, it's going to take a lot. So a few things that we found that are really important to look for. Number one, an interpersonal style that is relatively serious, focused, and can command a meeting. They're ultimately going to be managing a team and a group of individuals not on the team. And it's important that they have the ability to be respectful yet direct. Really important, as opposed to somebody that is much more focused on pleasing or somebody who's more of a politician type. We find people that are respectful yet direct important. Number two, their thinking style. Creative, analytic. They're going to be getting a lot of data from a lot of places. We really want to make sure that this director can connect a lot of the dots, okay, and not make a decision up front that they stick with, but yet they can evolve their thinking. And number three, from a motivation standpoint, this is really important. These individuals tend to be under political. Now, what do I mean by under political? Yeah. What I mean by under political, Nicole, if we can show some of the video as well, that would be great, is they're not raising their hand trying to get that position. In fact, when you tap them on the shoulder for the role, not only they're going to resist, but their career path is probably not going to have fallen that much of a linear path. They probably did different things along their career which were unrelated. which the executive search firms, having come from that industry, frankly resist. Search firms, as you know, Sean, really like to present people who are have a pedigree, and they worked at Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and they rose all these ranks. We're not looking for that. We're looking for somebody that maybe when they graduated school, they started a business. Maybe the business struggled, then they maybe became a teacher, then they started another business, worked at a larger company. Ultimately, you want to see a track record of achievement, but you don't want to necessarily see that linear path.
Right.
Great. If we can go back to the slide. That tap on the shoulder, that conversation is a critical moment. It's a critical moment because that relationship, that bond between the producer and director, as we talked about in Singapore, it's very symbiotic. Those who saw the movie The Darkest Hour would have seen when King George VI tapped Winston Churchill on the shoulder. They set up weekly meetings. So they're going to need to really have a type of special collaboration. That in mind, we're going to go on to the next step, which is team and allies and enemies.
David, if I could just make a fine point on that previous one, and that's once the producer, once the CEO has selected that individual, it's not the end of the CEO's involvement of that individual. So there is a critical mentoring support. Get out of the way, but stay involved. Correct?
Absolutely. Okay. And you will see this again in the hero's journey on that keyword mentor that John brings up. Mentor seems to be pretty consistent with a lot of the movies I mentioned already. There's going to be moments in time that director is going to get tested. They're going to run into different obstacles, etc. If they don't have the air cover and the mentorship from that producer, they will fail. I can't emphasize enough to the group. There are absolutely best practices on how to be an ideal producer. And we can talk more about this afterwards. You can reach out to Sean for more information. But this director will fail without the type of collaboration with you necessary. You don't want to, you can't micromanage. You need to let them choose their own team. You need to let them choose the goals and the metrics, but you need to be there when they have issues, doubts, etc. Otherwise, no matter how good they are, they will fail. I want to give you an example. Alan Mullally at Ford, before he took on that role to turn Ford around, he had some very specific needs and requests that are widely published from Bill Ford, who served as his producer. Now, keep in mind, Bill Ford, before he moved into the role of producer, was the CEO. So he had experience being that director, and then he moved back to that role. And that relationship, that dynamic duo was important. So now the next step is, okay, so you got the producer, you've set your goal, you've tapped the director on the shoulder. And what's going to happen is the director needs to assemble a team. Okay. The key in assembling the team is diversity of thought. As I mentioned before, we do want to see a very analytic mind in the director who can triangulate a lot of information. However, we don't want everyone on their team to be that way. Okay, and this is part of our vision for a world where people are understood. We do want different styles of people to all come together. And the four main styles we want to see is we want to see action orientation, we want to see a planning, strategic orientation, we want to see agile thinking, and we want to see creative thinking. So in terms of assembling those individuals, we highly recommend you use some assessment, some independent data. Don't go just with your intuition. The director should not go just with their intuition. Get some independent data. Make sure that although people may appear one way, try to get under the surface for how they really think. Okay, so you assemble the team. The second thing is the allies. The team needs to sit down and think about what allies they're going to need. I'll give you an example. We've been working with a very large restaurant-related organization. They were going through a evolution, and they brought in one of the big four consulting firms to do a bunch of their technical work. Now, the project director at that system integrator is what we would call a potential ally. It could even be an enemy. Sometimes consulting firms, their interests aren't totally aligned.
Correct.
Right? So understanding who could be your allies, who could be your potential even enemies along the way. You know, there's a lot of consulting firms, you know, that can lead to scope creep. But then there's other consultant firms that really don't. You can come up with success-based metrics, et cetera. So thinking through who your allies and enemies could be, we call that the cast of characters. Okay, ultimately, before we move to the next phase, I would say you want to establish a set of team norms. Team norms are how frequently will this team meet? And depending on the sense of urgency of the project, we had a client that had a disaster in Thailand, disaster. Floods occurred and factories had to shut down, thousands of people out of work. They had to get this stuff back quickly. They set up 2 meetings a day minimum. On other types of transformations, you know, we might see a weekly meeting. Depending on the style of the people, they may want frequent meetings, but very action oriented, or they may want to have more lengthy meetings every week or 2.
David, you know, you speak a lot about the hyper leader.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, these, the categories that we've been through, identifying the right hyper leader. What is a hyper director and how do they differ from other business leaders? Can you put some fine sort of
Absolutely.
detail on that for us?
And, you know, why don't we take it, Nicole, to the next slide in the crisis moment and do that in the context of that. So effectively what's going to happen, and this again goes back to the hero's journey model, that now that you have your team, you got your cast of characters, you got air cover, you got a specific mission. Okay, you're going to go out there and you're going to run into all these issues. Now, we call it the crisis moment for this model. The crisis could be a positive thing in that it's actually an opportunity. I mean, we're sitting there. You think about a company like Friendster, if I recall correctly, and Reid Hoffman making a comment that they just could not scale. They had all this demand and they could not scale.
Yes.
And the company goes out of business and then Facebook comes about. So that crisis could be a positive, which hopefully it is, it's an opportunity, versus a challenge. So to your question, Sean, what is the hyper director really? How does that come to fruition in this case? Well, what they're going to be very, very good at is being able to have the resilience and being able to triangulate the data, but at the same time, have the courage to be able to get help. They're going to get help from their team. So the way they're going to run team meetings is going to be a lot of inquiry. They will have gotten the allies. They're going to be willing to reach out to people for help and ask dumb questions. That client I mentioned that ran into some issues with the system integrator, with our collaboration, we got them on the phone with some other hyper directors that had been through a similar challenge to that before from different industry. They pulled those principles. So they're not going to think they know all the answers. That's why that integrative thinking is very important. They need to have the tendency to take in all of that data. And they also are likely going to then come back to you, the owner, the producer, and probably try to quit. They're probably going to have some level of self-doubt. We see this in the movie model. We see it also in corporate. They're honest enough with themselves. They're actually going to probably have a mental breakdown, depending on the level of this crisis.
Right.
And it is so important that you, the producer at this point, really can come forth and sit down with them. I was speaking with large government client of ours the other day, and he mentioned that, you know, right when he was about, you know, literally almost just completely about to throw in the towel, his producer came in, sat down in his chair in the office and basically looked at him and said, I've been through this before myself. I believe in you. You can do it. We're going to do it together. And that was enough for them to reinitiate. So they're gonna get along well with others.
And you know, one of the things that struck me, David, from the work that you've done with us is clearly identifying those hypers who have responsibility at their core, who can drive for a particular result, you know, at the literally not in a negative way, but very, very focused on the outcome and what it takes to get that outcome.
Yeah.
And then providing the conditions, the frame with the other characters to enable that result to happen. Would that be accurate?
It's very accurate. And, you know, drawing another analogy back to sports, we were speaking with one of the NFL coaches recently. He said the #1 determination of success on the team is the relationship between him and the owner. Okay, so think about the head coach as more the director in this model, carrying that out. But again, to Sean's point, going back and being able to collaborate with that producer when they get to those key moments.
Great.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's go to the next step on the process here. So in terms of the crisis moment, that issue has identified itself, and all of a sudden you start getting some inputs, et cetera, from others. The resilience has been tested of the director. They're prevailing, and now the question becomes, okay. How is it, whether it was the example of that Friendster that I mentioned or any other type of crisis moment, how are you going to solve the problem? Well, this I want to give some credit to a leader of one of the large consumer packaged goods company who had mentioned to me early on that the best solutions emerged not only with this leader, but with the team of diverse thinkers where you get around a table like the table Sean and I are at today, and you really get some divergent thinking going. And the divergent thinking effectively is different points of view challenging one another. Again, you need to make sure you have the right minds around the table with different viewpoints. But ultimately, through that healthy debate, through that discourse, some new ideas going to emerge. And that new idea is going to have the collective buy-in of the group because they were all part of it. And this gets back to why the interpersonal style of the director is so important. This person needs to be able to lead that type of meeting. They need to be able to facilitate it on one hand. They need to be able to call on people who are quiet at the table, not contributing. And they need to ultimately be the catalyst to bring all of that together. And ultimately what you should have are some divergent thoughts that emerge that no one person could have come at themselves. And ultimately you do have the group buy-in since they were all part of that. So that breakthrough solution piece is key. Additional thoughts on that, Sean?
You know, I like the practical experience of having the divergent thoughts and the different perspectives on the table. What really benefited us was, taking somebody like myself that's more of a systemic thinker, that's more connecting the dots, focused on the big picture and the result, but because I'm very operationally geared, I don't spend a lot of time in the creative zone, in the innovation zone, because it's day to day. It's in the flow of activity. So having a group, really identified and their team, that's different, it really has been transformative for the way I think about, coming up with solutions, crowdsourcing those with different ideas. Obviously, the hyper director needs to be open to collaborating and open for that feedback. It can't be, okay, I've taken it, I'm still going to go in my own direction. That may be one potential decision. But I think having the diversity of thought, thinking out of the box, and it may not be individuals that we have found just from within the organization. In our case, it may be a member, it may be a vendor, it may be, a thought leader, that's done some amazing things in their career that has an aligned set of skills, and really being open to, it's opening the kimono in a way, and really accepting the risk of that in service to finding the best possible thinking to get it done. And that's why I love the cast of character analogy, because you can really start to see how that comes out.
And they don't need to be employed by you. And this is really key. Is, we're in a world right now, whether it's LinkedIn, the YPO network, et cetera, you have access to the best minds out there. And the reality of the situation is, for somebody that's already gone through the hero's journey themselves as a director, they love being part of problems. They thrive. Actually, when you're done with the hero's journey, the first thing you try to do is figure out how you get on the next one. So there's so much free help out there. And we've done this ourselves at our company. We'll bring outsiders in. They're not even employed, and they will be part of that. So that's, to Sean's point, the cast of characters. The cast of characters are the people that are not directly on your team, but who can still be part of that solution.
David, it beautifully said. And when I think of this model, and I think of the hero's journey, and I think of my own personal entrepreneurial journey, and many of our members, who are with us today, your own journey, whether it's, You know, as a young man, I was forced to join the army. I didn't have a choice. But that was a hero's.
He was telling me that earlier. I didn't believe he was.
That was a hero's journey, you know, and you can align that to you know, your experiences.
But you were reluctant, right? What were your concerns?
Completely reluctant.
Yeah.
You know, going into a situation you knew nothing about.
Yeah.
You know, operational zones, wars. You know, counterinsurgency, and you know, you either adapt, and you need great leaders. You need great training.
Yeah.
You need competent individuals to provide you the resources. You know, so when you brought this technology to us,
yeah.
You know, and we've started to play through it, it really gives you, there are leverage points, there are anchors, you know, and it's a simple analogy to describe to people.
Yeah.
You know, when you sit down and you're putting your team together,
yeah.
making sure that you've got the right cast of characters, the right people, you know, with you on the journey. Also being able to identify the barriers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. You think about the barriers. We use the word enemies in the model. Yes. The enemies could be competitors. It could be internal. You know, I'm thinking another client of our large private equity firm. There's people inside the firm itself that do not want to go a certain direction that the director and the owner, the producer, want to go. So keep in mind, those enemies could be inside, outside. What we suggest is try to do as good of a job as a team to figure out who those blockers could be,
right.
The enemies could be, and try to think about how to engage them. How do you at least neutralize them? And there's usually an approach, but it is very important you know those, because you know, all you need is one blocker along the way. It could take out your whole journey.
So David, you've taken us through the sort of the 6, and I know there's 7, but you've taken us through, you know, the architecture. Once you've actually achieved a breakthrough or a result or a transformative outcome, you know, with this model, what is that final piece to close the loop?
To close the loop, yeah. And what I would ask Nicole is if we could put up the other poll question, if I recall, please. In the meantime, as we do go through that, kick us off on that, Nicole.
So Nicole's going to load up another poll question.
Yep.
So here it's about just giving us a sense of what some of your biggest priorities are in these 3 categories, whether it's in mergers and integration, digital transformation, a new product launch. What are your biggest priorities that some of you are facing today?
Yeah, that actually could warrant something like this. And as Nicole's pointed that up in addressing Sean's question, celebrate victory. This is really important. This too, and again, all of these were inspired on our own work, and then we've linked it to Hero's Journey. The celebrate victory is very important because you're going to have another issue around the corner. And what you want to happen is you want heroes to present themselves more easily. And the extent to which you celebrate a hero is interesting. Even when I worked at corporate executive board, it's very interesting. Whenever people would accomplish a big outcome, they went out of their way to really shine a light on it, like big time. I didn't even understand why they were doing it almost until now. That when you shine the light on that victory, when you celebrate that victory, it's going to be easier to recruit other heroes down the path, and it's going to, of course, provide all the other momentum to be able to continue to grow the organization. What do we got here?
So, David, not surprisingly, digital transformation has come out as the highest priority of the group at 49%, followed by new product launch and then by mergers and integration. That's near and dear to our heart.
Yep.
I mean, you know, we've literally embarking on a massive digital transformation within YPO, and we have to get it right.
Yeah.
You know, there's no room for failure with us, and that's for many of our companies. We know that change is constant. We know that all of us have to be digital in absolutely every aspect of the business. So can you talk to the model as it applies to digital transformation and the importance of how we apply this, and maybe give some examples, because I know that you've done this work specifically in the digital transformation area.
Yeah, and I wish we had a few of our clients right here who could speak firsthand to it. Just sort of applying it to the model that we can see right here. I think that business as usual is an important place always to start, which is why are we doing this? One of the trends we're hearing about now is, because even digital transformation getting a little buzzwordy-ish these days, we're really talking about digitizing the business. Okay, what is every aspect of the business that can be sort of digitized? And I think what's very important from the owner's perspective is to figure out something that's time-bound, that can have a victory to it, ideally maybe even a 6-12 month type of time frame, hit a milestone. With YPO, it might be just literally how people apply to get into YPO.
Absolutely.
Or it might be just the whole location-based stuff that when you fly to a new area, it can suggest what to do activity-wise in the area and YPO events going on. Choose something that you can really have a victory around. Start small, finish big, clearly on that. So I think, but you've got to start with the current business as usual, and don't look at it as necessarily transforming something, but what can be actually digitized.
Great point. And I think we're going to open it up to Q&A, and we've already got a comment really from Keith Fox, who asked, or who said, David, great progress on your model and your business. The producer-director analogy is clear. Thank you for that, Keith. And you've added a link on brand strategy, positioning, and execution. Mm-hmm. Now we haven't got time to dive into that specifically, but maybe talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think again, once you're that director in place, being able to take that step back and say, who's the thought leader in that space? If this is going to take some clever branding, clever strategy, again, what's sort of interesting is you actually don't even need to hire these individuals. That cast a character thing is key, because a lot of small businesses, medium businesses, the issue is how do you recruit the right talent for these roles? You do need the right director. And those directors are recruitable, by the way. They're out there. There's a lot of them that are not flashy. They don't have pedigree, but they have those three things that we talked about: the interpersonal dynamic, the thinking pattern, and the right motivation. But that curious mind, they're going to get on the phone and they're going to just call the experts in whatever space, branding or whatever it may be, and bring them to the table.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to open it up to Q&A using the Q&A facility, the open window. Please write in your questions, and we'll take them on, and have them be as broad-based or as detailed as you like. Before we get those coming in, so please go ahead and put any questions for David that you would like answered, and any specifics. David, we've spoken about the model, and you've laid it out, I think, really, really well. And to Keith's point, I echo that. There are some very tactical things. Yeah. There are some very specific tools, which we're not going to have time to get into in a lot of detail. But one of the things that I've really benefited from through the utilization of your system is, being able to very quickly, accurately, through a very well-researched and validated tool, get to understand what the role style of the individual is and the decision-making style of the individual, which is so important to understand. When you're putting the hyper team together, and you're looking at that, it's been phenomenal for us just to be able to say, how does a person think and how does a person decide? So before we go to the first question, I don't want you to kind of, go down a rabbit trail there, but, maybe talk about just very briefly some of the basic tools, that are available to our members, or what they should be thinking about. It's not just with you. It could be, in the domain of these types of things.
I think the important thing to keep in mind is personality assessments have been used for years, and there's a lot of them out there. Personality really comes down to how you interact with the world, how you communicate. Personality is what you're seeing with Sean, what you're seeing with me today, and that's what Sean referred to as your interpersonal style. And that's one dimension of it, and it's an important dimension. It's actually very important because most of your time is interacting with other people. How many of you, though, have sat around a table to come to a decision? A lot of people are nodding their heads, sort of like what Sean's doing now, and you think they agree with you, when in fact they go off and they go a different direction. It happens all the time. And that's where we found there's another dimension to this, which is your operating style, how you make decisions, how you actually process information. And those don't correlate. Okay. In other words, somebody could appear very open-minded, but actually need a lot more data to make a decision. Or on the other hand, they could seem like they're completely against your idea, but actually are just trying to acquire more information. So just keep in mind that you're looking for two things, and you can use our assessment on that. You can also do it simply by observing and through reference checking. People just don't do the reference checks nearly as much as they need to. You can get to how people think and make decisions by speaking to people who specifically worked with them on a problem before. Try to understand how they went about problem solving. Did they take a lot of data in? Did they change their mind? Really probe to get to that. As the questions are also coming in, there's something else I want to really bring us all back to, so we don't have to squeeze this in the last minute, and that is, you're a producer. All of you, basically every one of you, have already been through at least one hero's journey.
Absolutely.
Just even what Sean mentioned, with military, you've been the hero, you've experienced it. Now you have such a privilege and just such an exciting opportunity to enable others to go through that hero's journey. And that does mean choosing the worthy quest, and it does mean tapping the right person on the shoulder to lead it. But boy, the ability to do that is probably the best privilege. You're sitting there, you're creating stakeholder value, and you're unleashing human potential. And this becomes a way to really organize those two together in a very repeatable manner.
So we've got a plethora of questions coming through.
Let's roll.
So I'm gonna roll with them, and I'm gonna start at the top. So Rahul Argawal has asked, my question is in regards to defining your victory.
Yeah.
Can you provide examples of reasonable metrics? What is a good way to determine achievability?
Yeah, so in terms of the metrics, we do find that the ultimate end objective should be defined by the owner. And again, going back to the sports analogy, the owner of the team is ultimately the one who's going to decide how much is going to be spent, what we're going to do to achieve either the Super Bowl or the dynasty. How serious are we? But it is very important from our experience that the actual goals and the metrics together are defined by the director. And in terms of some specific examples on the goals and the metrics, that could be anything if it's IT related to cycle times, release cycles, in terms of growth of the business, organic growth, inorganic numbers, product launch, how you're going to measure it. Net Promoter Score was a nice one, but we need to move beyond just that. And I think the team itself should be able to figure it out, and certainly the allies can give inputs as well. Excellent.
David, this is a very nuanced one. How do you neutralize your enemies or your blockers or your constrainers inside the business? How do you neutralize them?
Inside the business. And I really appreciate that question, by the way. This inside the business one came on some of our preparation for today's call, where we heard multiple people saying, you're going to have more enemies internally than externally. Well, I think the big question, first of all, is for the director and their core allies, core team, to figure out, do they believe this person is a critic or are they a cynic? Mm-hmm. Really important. The critics you can usually get to become your biggest advocates. The cynics who are going to get in the way, that's going to be an issue. I think the director needs to give it a wholehearted attempt to sit down and really understand what's going on in their mind. But ultimately, if that person's getting in the way, how many of you use the expression, I never let someone go soon enough? I never regretted letting someone go. You got to fire people. And if they're going to get in the way of that goal, unfortunately, those decisions have to be made. We've seen one, weak link take down a whole transformation. But again, be very careful, because a lot of the times it really is just a critic. And they just want their voice to be heard. They want to be part of it. They could become one of your advocates down the road.
And I think for us, just to put a fine point in it, identifying where your constraints are up front is really, really key. Mm-hmm. So having that also top of mind you know, in relation to what do you need in order to actually get to the end goal.
Yeah.
You know, it's part of your mapping process, which I find so useful. We have another question, and it's, should the hero be only an individual, or can it be a task force with the CEO being the chair of the task force working towards a vision? So your decision team concept, perhaps.
Yeah, great question as well. I mean, one of the beautiful things about the model is everyone who's part of the journey is part of the victory. And, you know, although we're using the word, in this case, the hero, to connect to that director,
Yes.
the reality is everyone part of this team is really experiencing it. And it gets back to the concept of knowing what role you fit best. I'll give you an example. There could be somebody as a core team member that plays the role of a sparring partner. They're the ones that give pushback. There may be someone else that you know, creates the ideas and idea flow when you run into issues. The ideaphoria person. You know, there's going to be the dollars and cents person. You know, all of these are critical. They're all heroes in their own way. They may even have a side initiative that feeds into the main initiative. So you have many hero paths.
Yes.
But the important piece for that to keep in mind with the director is the director, since they're under political and they're not usually motivated by power or control, they really are about the mission. If they do their job properly, everyone part of the group is going to feel that they played they're a hero too. And ultimately that victory celebration, that's something to your earlier point, Sean, that the loop should be closed to that point properly.
And we spoke about this last night, actually, which is really interesting, because the follow-up question to this is, okay, you've explained the organization, you know, that the hero is doing, you know, the interesting stuff, and the rest of us, maybe the rest of the organization, is doing the business as usual and ordinary.
Yep.
And remember, we spoke about in the context of YPO's renewal,
Yep.
and how we've come through a very good sort of historic renewal cycle, and you know, we're at a 95% renewal rate, and we're only 2 weeks in, you know, into August, which is fantastic. That took the entire organization to do, even though there was a hero and a hero team.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that those that are doing business as usual, you know, also get some of the juice, if I could call it that?
Absolutely. Well, I do think, you know, being part of the journey, I mean, we spend so much time watching movies and spectator sports, etc. What we believe is you are in a position as the producer, the owner of the organization, to create these storylines, create these that, you know, it may not involve everyone in the organization, but think about it from the standpoint of how many storylines do you need over the year so everyone can experience being part of the hero's journey.
Great. So here's another one from James, who's asked, when seeking to exit your business and to bring in a CEO 1 to 2 years out from that event so that you can walk away after the transaction, in this scenario, how would the producer and director and indeed cast members' relationships work to ensure a successful exit? I know that you advise a lot of people.
Read just the first part of that again, the first half.
When seeking to exit your business and bring in a CEO 1 to 2 years out from that event so that you as the exitee can walk away from the transaction, in that scenario, how would the producer and director and indeed the cast members' relationships work to ensure?
Okay, so in this scenario, is it we're looking to exit 2 years from now? Is that the scenario?
That's the scenario.
And we're looking to bring the CEO in now, we're saying, or
how do we? And then how do the rest of the cast members, you know, how does that relationship impact, I guess, the cast members to ensure a successful exit?
Well, I think the key thing, and going back to my search experience on this before, is being extremely clear on what you need the CEO to do. What is, you know, again, you're the owner, the CEO is the hired gun in this case, right, is the director. What is the mission that person needs to do? The other thing is to get input from the cast members on the spec of the CEO. because if they're part of the journey as well, they'll be that much more bought in. So we found, there's a lot of searches going on out there that are sort of confidential searches, but the reality is most of the people in the company know there's a search going on. Involve them, because if they have a say. Now, when you get to the final candidates, this is a slight tangent, but when you do get to the final CEO candidates, obviously not everyone can interview them. But as you think about some of the key people who are going to work with them, you may want to have them meet a couple of the finalists, but say to them, when you meet them, I just want you to tell me, you being the producer, if there's anything I've overlooked, if there's any major issue. It shouldn't be a vote if you hire the CEO, but anything you can do to involve the cast members. They may even be able to source candidates.
That's a great point, and it brings up another question, twofold question really. Does a hero need to have subject matter expertise, and you've spoken about this, or more looking for the director with the right soft skills, and this is what it's all about. So maybe tackle that one first.
Yeah, so let me give you an example. Going back to Thailand, a client of ours involved with a large manufacturing company. Thai floods occur about 8-9 years or so ago. Wipes out thousands of workers out of a job. Okay. In this case, the CEO, who was the producer, had to make a decision. He needed to decide how far they'd be willing to go to save the company. Literally speaking, being a large public company, they're on the phone with Wall Street, giving all the disclosures of what could happen. But he made a decision that they would spend whatever it takes to succeed, period, end of story. And not just say they did it. Then he had to choose who the director is. And he chose that director, and that person went out there. Now, this director knew nothing about floods. He knew nothing about any of this experience at all, nothing. Yeah. But as we really sat down with him, as we have with dozens of other clients who've been through these challenges that they've never seen before, the same pattern emerged. It all came down to the team and the cast. He got the Thai Navy involved. They got some other companies involved. They had divers involved. He knew nothing about this 2 weeks before. But it was really about the divergent thinking and those ideas that emerged through multiple meetings a day.
And, a corollary.
The answer is the domain, actually, in fact, on the domain experience, it can, depending on the situation, domain experience could really hamper you. Because you're going to come in with biases already.
You're going to come in with a bias, a fixed point of view.
If the person has a growth mindset, an analytic mind, the right interpersonal demeanor to get the information from people. So it's not just the soft piece. Soft piece might be the interpersonal demeanor, but they need the processing speed to connect the dots, and they need the motivation that they thrive on adventure, novelty, and newness.
And I think, in fact, your last comment is going to answer the second part of the question, which was, how does the hero compare to a strategy, the hero strategy, compared to a strategy of hiring a dedicated, trained project manager in a company org structure? In the context of your connect the dots, because I think that you answered the question, but maybe be...
Well, again, I think there's different flavors of project managers.
Right.
And that's why you got to start back at the first stage, which is business as usual. There's a lot of business as usual continuous improvement, like improving the mailroom. You would want a project manager on it, but you're going to want a different profile than the person that's going to transform the business to the next stage. And by the way, that tends to be as much thinking pattern. They're going to be more kind of tactical thinkers for the more basic things. And motivationally, they're probably going to be more interested in all the details and more expertise. The hyper director we're talking about for your big quests, we actually don't even like them to be as motivated to know all the details. They've got to be able to delegate and bring the right minds in. We want their motivation to be adventure, novelty, newness, and really winning. That's the mentality. And that's why we find from a career pattern, look for resumes that they jumped around to different industries, but they had a pattern of success.
Fantastic. And that's, that mirrors my experience with the model. Is it fair to say that the producer drives the vision statement, the direction, and the director helps drive and execute the mission statement, and then the subsequent changes to them? That's a question.
Yeah, very much. The producer is thinking longer range. If you think back to our session at the Edge, which you can watch on the YPO network.
On the source, on the exchange.
Yeah. we talked at length about whether people in the audience were a producer or a director. And what we ultimately found is most people were playing a little bit of both. And what we came to find in the end, the most successful ones, if you think back to even a Microsoft early on, if you look at a Paul Allen, a Bill Gates, and a Ballmer, one of those clearly was a producer, clearly one was a director. And then you take a look at why is it Ballmer's running the business without those two guys as involved, okay? And then it wasn't as successful. What was going on there? And we don't know the answer, but we would imagine it lies within this.
Right.
You know, was Gates the right producer, or was Gates more the director? What was Paul Allen's role that they never,
Right.
These are all kind of interesting things. But yes, ultimately the producer is going to have an ability to think much longer term, where the director needs to think about the winning right now. And the vision versus mission is a very good way of putting it.
David, what's come up for me on this journey, particularly over the past year that we've been involved in the hyper system, is we have time-bound, transformative, crises type or really important transformational aspects. What about, when you put your cast of characters together, we've been calling it a decision team.
Yep.
What should be the cadence? Talk a little bit about structurally, maybe a little more tactically about continuity, the importance of sustaining, the measurement of that, the relationship between the hyper director and the producer, which is so critical to get right.
Yeah.
I'm blessed, that I've got an amazing producer in Scott Mordell.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't have that.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the cadence and maybe how the how-to of a decision team and what you recommend for that.
Yeah, well, again, it really goes back to that order. If we can go back to just the steps in the process, all of you out there are set up now to be a terrific producer. Okay, you understand the model. There's a couple things you need to do. What you need to be doing is make sure that that mission is worthy. Do not go down the path of launching a bunch of different ones. As Sean talked about the decision group at YPO, they chose a couple of them. That was it. Don't do too many of these at one time. So first of all, limit what they are. Make sure you get the right director in there, and be prepared to ride shotgun. Okay, weekly meetings. Set up a weekly meeting with the director and the producer to make sure the two are absolutely in sync. And yet, don't micromanage their choices of who they hire. Don't micromanage the goals. Don't micromanage the metrics. Keep their eye, though, on the ultimate prize. And then finally, from a structure standpoint, define the group norms. The team norms are a really important step in this thing. And the frequency of meetings, how decisions will be made, et cetera. Even if you have a crisis mode and you only have 2 weeks to get through it, spend a half an hour with the team and define how that stuff will happen. Has that been your experience?
That's been my experience and has worked so well. It also helps eliminate surprises.
Yeah.
It helps really gel. Transparency is important in the mix, I find, and you've got to practice it.
Yeah.
This is not a skill set or a muscle that people often use. So practice, and that's where the mentoring relationship, particularly between the producer and the director, works well. We have a final question because we've only got a couple of minutes to go.
That's a lot of questions.
This is great.
A lot of questions.
And this is from Giacomo Bali, who said, here's the scenario. The company is doing well. It could do better with a renovation or a modernization rather than doing things the same way. As a board member, how do you help identify key producer-director, assuming they will be inherently different from what the company and current management are used to? Also, any tips to persuade other board members? This is a great
this is a great closing question. So in this case, Sean, would you assume this means as a board member?
Yes, as a board member.
This person is not producer or director.
Yes.
And is thinking about how they cast.
That's how I'm interpreting it. So interpret it that way.
Yeah. So I think in that case, I would actually, as a board member, you're in a position to really be able to, ask curious questions. You know, oftentimes I know that you'll have check-ins with the executive team over the year and have dinners with them, etc. I think you want to have conversations with people, and you want to, for the producer one, keep an eye out for people who are thinking longer term, people thinking a year, 2, 3 out, and are raising very interesting points, concerns, etc. May even be somebody that tendered a resignation to go to a competitor, and as a board member, you're trying to save them to stay there. They say, well, I'll stay here if we can go this direction.
Right.
So keep an eye out for long range thinking for producer, and on the director one, really look at people that have had a pattern of they got most energized when they had to go make something very mission driven happen.
And if I can be bold and answer the how do you do it with your board, we did it. You did it. Yeah. We went in and we assessed the board based on their own
all 22 board members.
Got them familiar with the model, yeah, so that the buy-in, yeah, was really, really there, and the understanding of nuances. They didn't have to be experts, yeah, but that really enabled Scott then to drive through, you know, the decision, team concept, you know, the director concept. So for us, it worked. You know, I would engage the board because that's been our personal experience.
And then there was a common language. They were using
common language.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're at the end of our time. I just wanted to thank, firstly, I wanted to thank David and your team. It's been a fantastic journey that we've had with you. We put David's contact details up on the screen. You can feel free to contact David. David has been really kind for 20 individuals, the first 20 individuals, members who contact him. He will spend complimentary time on a discussion on, you know, how to utilize this, you know, how it's worked.
It's got to be exciting, though. We need an exciting quest.
An exciting quest. Find an exciting quest, not just humdrum. Yeah. And David will spend time with you. If you miss David's contacts, this will be again on the exchange. Please feel free to reach out to me personally. You know, smcginnis@ypo.org. You can find me through the exchange. I'll be happy to walk you through our experiences and help in any way we can. This is what these GCCs are about. I'd like to thank again Zoom for hosting us today, and thank you all. You are our heroes. You're on your own individual journeys, and YPO is here to help you along that path. So have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. And David, thank you again.
Thank you, Sean.
Really appreciate it. Thank you all. And thank you, Nicole, and thank you for all the team in the background that's helped make this happen.